From wake up to lockdown, the hidden system that runs every U.S. prisoner's life. Every prison day begins the same way, not because it has to, but because it's designed to. Long before most of the outside world wakes up, thousands of incarcerated people across the United States are already standing, waiting, and responding. Lights come on. Counts begin. Movement is restricted. Silence is enforced. The day does not start when the body is ready. It starts when the system says so. From that first moment until the final lockdown at night, almost nothing inside a prison happens by choice. Meals are timed. Movement is scheduled. Work, rest, conversation, and sleep all occur within narrow, predefined windows. This documentary is not about what prisoners do. It is about what they are allowed to do and when. Behind every American prison is an invisible framework that dictates daily life with precision. It is not written on a single wall or enforced by a single officer. It is a system made of schedules, counts, call-outs, lockdowns, and permissions. A system so routine that it often goes unnoticed, even by those living inside it. Yet this system quietly controls everything. From wake up to lockdown, every hour is structured to reduce unpredictability, manage behavior, and maintain order. The design is efficient. It is intentional. And over time, it reshapes how people think, act, and perceive themselves. Most people imagine prison control as something physical, bars, doors, fences. But the most powerful control is procedural. It is built into the day itself. When you control time, you control choices. When you control choices, you control behavior. This is why prison life feels repetitive, draining, and strangely timeless. Days blend together. Weeks pass unnoticed. The future feels distant. The present becomes a series of instructions to follow. And the effects don't stop at the prison gate. Former inmates often describe how difficult it is to adjust to freedom, not because of fear, but because of choice. After years of living inside a system that decided everything for them, unstructured time can feel overwhelming. The system may release the body, but the routine lingers in the mind. In this documentary, we will follow a single prison day from start to finish, not to sensationalize incarceration, but to understand it. We will examine how mornings establish control before the day begins, how work and movement are used to manage large populations, how free time is carefully limited and monitored, how evenings and lockdown reinforce dependence and fatigue. And most importantly, we will explore how this hidden system shapes behavior in ways that last long after release. Because prison is not just a place you are sent. It is a system you are absorbed into. And once the day begins, there is no stepping outside of it. Wake up. How the day begins without your consent. Inside an American prison, the day does not begin naturally. It begins by command. There is no gradual transition from sleep to wakefulness. No personal decision to rise early or rest longer. The morning arrives at the same time, every day, regardless of fatigue, illness, or mental state. Lights come on. Announcements echo through housing units. Correctional officers move through corridors. The message is immediate and unmistakable. The day has started, whether you are ready or not. This moment is not accidental. It is foundational. Wake up is one of the most important psychological points in the prison day because it establishes authority before any activity begins. Before food, before movement, before conversation, incarcerated people are reminded that even their most basic biological rhythms are no longer their own. Sleep inside prison is rarely uninterrupted. Noise travels easily through concrete and steel. Doors open and close throughout the night. Officers conduct overnight counts. Lights may remain partially on for security reasons. As a result, many people wake already exhausted. But exhaustion is irrelevant to the schedule. When wake-up occurs, compliance is expected immediately. In many facilities, incarcerated people must sit up, stand, or make themselves visible almost as soon as they are awake. Beds must be cleared. Bodies must be present. Silence is often enforced. This is followed quickly by the first official count of the day. The count is more than a security procedure. It is a ritual. During count, everything stops. Movement freezes. Conversations end. Every person must be seen and accounted for in a specific way. Failure to comply, even unintentionally, can result in disciplinary consequences. This teaches an early lesson. The day begins with observation, not action. Psychologically, this matters deeply. Starting the day under surveillance sets the tone for everything that follows. It reinforces the idea that nothing happens until the institution confirms control. Before a person can eat, speak freely, or move, they must first be verified. This order, control before activity, is repeated every morning without exception. Over time, people stop thinking of wake up as a personal moment. It becomes an external event, something imposed rather than experienced. The body reacts automatically. The mind follows. Many incarcerated individuals describe reaching a point where they wake up seconds before the lights turn on, not because they want to, but because their body has adapted to the schedule. This is not comfort. It is conditioning. The brain learns patterns quickly, especially under pressure. After count clears, the next phase begins almost immediately. Breakfast is typically served early and under strict time limits. Lines form. Trays are issued. Seating is controlled. There is little room for delay. Eating becomes functional rather than social. There is no option to eat later. There is no option to eat slowly. There is no option to skip and return. Food, like time, becomes institutional property. This early scarcity reinforces dependence on the system. If you miss breakfast because of a delayed count, a medical call-out, or unit restrictions, that meal is simply gone. Hunger is treated as a byproduct of order, not a problem to be solved. The morning continues with announcements that dictate movement. Some inmates are released for work details. Others remain locked in their units. Individual needs play no role. The schedule decides who moves and who waits. Waiting is an overlooked but powerful tool of control. Those who remain locked down during early hours experience time differently than those assigned to work. Minutes stretch. Thoughts drift. Anxiety builds quietly. There is no way to speed things up. There is nothing to do but comply. Over weeks and months, this creates a deep association between time and powerlessness. Outside prison, mornings are often associated with agency. People plan their day. They choose priorities. They decide where to go and what to do. Inside prison, mornings remove that sense of ownership entirely. The day is not something you shape. It is something you enter. Psychologists studying institutional environments have long observed that removing control at the start of the day reduces resistance later. When people begin their day without choice, they are less likely to challenge authority as the day continues. Energy is conserved. Expectations are lowered. This is one reason morning routines in prison are so rigid. The institution does not need to be aggressive. It needs to be consistent. Predictability replaces force. Routine replaces confrontation. By mid-morning, most incarcerated people are no longer thinking about freedom or choice. They are thinking about sequence. What happens next? When the next count occurs? When movement is allowed? Time becomes fragmented into institutional landmarks. Not hours, not minutes, but events. This mental shift is subtle, but profound. When time is no longer continuous, it loses meaning. Days blur together. Memory weakens. The future feels distant and abstract. This is the first stage of a much larger process. Wake up is not just the start of the day. It is the start of adaptation. By removing control at the very beginning, the system prepares the mind for everything that follows. Work feels less optional. Silence feels more natural. Waiting feels inevitable. And by the time the morning ends, the schedule has already done its job. Count, movement, and permission. How control expands after wake up. Once the prison day has begun, control does not loosen. It expands. If wake up establishes authority, then counts and movement rules reinforce it. Together, they form the core mechanism that allows prisons to manage thousands of people without constant confrontation. These systems are quiet, repetitive, and highly effective. At the center of this process is the count. Counts are conducted multiple times a day in every American prison. Their stated purpose is accountability, to ensure every incarcerated person is present and alive. But their psychological role goes much further than that. Counts divide the day into segments, interrupt activity, and repeatedly remind people that their presence is constantly monitored. During count, everything stops. Movement is frozen. Conversations end. People must position themselves in a specific way so they can be clearly seen. In some facilities, inmates stand by their bunks. In others, they sit upright or face their cell doors. The posture itself matters. Visibility is not optional. This interruption is deliberate. Counts break the flow of the day and replace it with enforced stillness. Even productive or permitted activities are instantly suspended. Over time, this trains the mind to expect interruption at any moment. Plans are tentative. Conversations remain unfinished. Focus is fragmented. The message is subtle but consistent. Nothing you are doing is more important than institutional control. Once count clears, movement resumes, but only in carefully controlled windows. Prison movement is never spontaneous. It happens in waves, at designated times, under supervision. Doors open briefly. Hallways fill. Then everything closes again. This system serves two purposes. First, it limits opportunity. Short movement windows reduce the chance for unsupervised interaction. Second, it conditions behavior. People learn to move quickly, quietly, and without deviation. Being late is not an inconvenience. It is a violation. Even small delays can have consequences. Missing a movement call can mean missing a meal, a work assignment, a medical appointment, or a program. There is no flexibility built into the system to accommodate personal circumstances. The schedule does not adapt to the individual. The individual adapts to the schedule. This constant adaptation reshapes priorities. People stop thinking in terms of what they need and start thinking in terms of what is allowed. Bathroom use, hydration, phone calls, even moments of rest are planned around movement rules. Over time, personal needs are delayed or ignored if they conflict with institutional timing. Permission becomes the central concept of daily life. In the free world, most actions are assumed to be allowed unless restricted. In prison, the opposite is true. Nothing is assumed. Everything requires authorization. When you can leave your cell, when you can speak, when you can move, when you can sit, when you can wait. This permission-based existence affects how people think about themselves. Psychologists studying controlled environments have noted that when individuals must constantly seek or anticipate permission, their sense of autonomy weakens. Decision-making skills decline. Initiative fades. People become reactive rather than proactive. In prison, this reactivity is often mistaken for discipline. A compliant inmate is frequently one who has learned to wait, to listen, to move only when directed, to avoid drawing attention. Over time, this becomes less about fear and more about energy conservation. Resisting the schedule is exhausting. Following it is easier. Movement control also reshapes social interaction. Conversations are cut short by counts. Relationships are fragmented by different movement schedules. People assigned to different work details may rarely see one another, even if they live in the same unit. This fragmentation reduces collective identity. Strong social bonds require time, privacy, and continuity. Prison schedules limit all three. Interaction becomes brief and conditional. Trust develops slowly, if at all. This reduces the likelihood of coordinated resistance while still allowing enough interaction to maintain basic social stability. Once again, control is achieved without force. As the morning transitions into midday, the cumulative effect of counts and movement rules becomes clear. The day no longer feels open-ended. It feels segmented. Each segment ends not when a task is finished, but when the schedule dictates. Time becomes something to navigate carefully rather than experience fully. Many incarcerated people describe learning to think several steps ahead, not in terms of goals, but in terms of restrictions. When is the next count? How long until movement? What might be interrupted? This constant calculation creates low-level stress that rarely disappears. Even moments of calm carry tension. You may be allowed to sit, but not too long. You may be allowed to speak, but not freely. You may be allowed to move, but only briefly. This environment produces a specific kind of mental fatigue. Not the exhaustion of hard labor, but the weariness of constant regulation. The mind remains alert, anticipating the next instruction. By the time midday arrives, the system has already narrowed behavior significantly. People are synchronized with institutional rhythms. Deviations are rare. Compliance feels normal. This is how large prison populations are managed efficiently, not through constant enforcement, but through repetition and permission. Work, routine, and the discipline of repetition. By the time the prison day reaches full momentum, control has already been firmly established. Wake-up removed personal choice. Counts and movement rules enforced permission. Now, Work assignments and structured activity take over, locking the schedule into place for the longest stretch of the day. This is where prison life begins to look productive from the outside. In many American prisons, incarcerated people are assigned jobs that keep the institution functioning. Kitchens must be staffed. Laundry must be processed. Floors must be cleaned. Maintenance tasks must be completed. Some inmates work in libraries, educational offices, or clerical roles. Others attend mandatory programs or classes during these hours. On paper, this appears rehabilitative. In reality, it is primarily regulatory. Work inside prison is not designed around personal growth. It is designed around predictability. Assignments are rarely chosen. They are given. Start times are fixed. End times are fixed. Breaks, if they exist, are brief and scheduled. Productivity is measured less by outcome and more by presence and compliance. Showing up matters more than excelling. Being late to work is treated as a rule violation. Leaving early without permission can result in disciplinary action. Even standing idle while waiting for instructions is still considered participation. The message is consistent. Your time is not yours to manage. Psychologically, this changes how effort is perceived. In the free world, work is often tied to purpose, earning income, building skills, progressing toward goals. In prison, work is disconnected from long-term reward. Wages are minimal. Advancement is limited. Tasks are repetitive. Over time, motivation shifts. People stop asking, "Why am I doing this?" They start asking, "What am I required to do next?" This shift reinforces institutional thinking. The value of work becomes obedience rather than accomplishment. The schedule, not the task, defines success. Repetition plays a central role here. Day after day, inmates perform the same tasks at the same times, under the same supervision. Variation is rare. Creativity is discouraged. Efficiency matters only insofar as it maintains order. Repetition simplifies management. Repetition reduces unpredictability. Repetition trains behavior. Psychologists have long noted that repetitive, low-autonomy work can reduce initiative over time. When decisions are removed from labor, people stop practicing decision-making altogether. This effect compounds when combined with restricted movement and constant surveillance. Inside prison, this combination is constant. Even educational programs and classes follow rigid schedules. Attendance is mandatory for some. Movement to and from classrooms is tightly controlled. Participation is monitored. Learning happens within narrow boundaries. This structure limits spontaneous engagement. Questions may be asked, but only within time limits. Discussions may occur, but only until the schedule demands movement elsewhere. The day never belongs to the individual. Midday also brings enforced waiting. Not everyone is assigned to work. Some remain locked in their housing units for hours at a time, waiting for the next authorized activity. Others experience gaps between assignments, periods where they can do nothing but sit and wait. Waiting may seem passive, but it is psychologically demanding. When people are forced to wait without control over duration or outcome, stress increases. Time feels slower. Thoughts loop. Minor frustrations grow larger. This effect is well documented in institutional settings. In prison, waiting is built into the day. These waiting periods reinforce a sense of dependency. Nothing progresses unless the system allows it to. Personal initiative has no effect on the pace of the day. Over time, this conditions people to stop expecting progress altogether. Silence often accompanies this phase of the day. Talking may be restricted during work hours or while waiting. Noise levels are controlled. Announcements interrupt without warning. The environment remains calm on the surface, but mentally exhausting beneath it. Silence limits social bonding. Silence limits emotional expression. Silence keeps attention inward. This inward focus can be draining. Without external stimulation or meaningful interaction, the mind turns on itself. Thoughts become repetitive. Anxiety becomes normalized. By the time midday work and structured activity end, many incarcerated people feel mentally depleted, not because of physical labor, but because of constant regulation. This depletion is functional from an institutional perspective. A tired population is less resistant. A predictable population is easier to manage. A regulated population rarely challenges the system. What's important to understand is that none of this requires aggression. The system relies on routine, not force. Compliance becomes the path of least resistance. Over weeks and months, people internalize the rhythm. They stop noticing the control because it feels normal. The schedule fades into the background of consciousness, guiding behavior automatically. This is one of the most powerful aspects of institutional life. Control that no longer feels imposed. By the time the afternoon approaches, the day already feels nearly complete. Energy is low. Expectations are minimal. The mind shifts from activity to endurance, waiting for the next phase of the schedule to arrive. Free time, that isn't free. Recreation, waiting, and managed relief. By the time the prison day reaches the afternoon, the system has already done most of its work. Wake-up removed personal control. Counts and movement enforced permission. Work and repetition drained energy and initiative. What comes next is often described as free time. On schedules, it may be labeled as recreation, dayroom access, or yard time. To someone outside prison, this sounds like a break, a chance to relax, socialize, or mentally reset. But inside an American prison, free time is one of the most misunderstood parts of the day, because it is never truly free. Afternoon recreation exists within strict limits. It is scheduled, conditional, and easily revoked. More importantly, it is framed as a privilege, not a right. That framing changes everything about how it is experienced. Recreation periods are announced in advance and often depend on staffing, security status, and the behavior of the unit. A single incident elsewhere in the facility can cancel recreation for hundreds of people who had nothing to do with it. When that happens, there is no alternative activity. People return to their cells and wait. This uncertainty is central to how control is maintained. Psychologically, anticipation followed by cancellation creates stress. Plans form in the mind. Exercise, conversation, a moment of movement, and then disappear instantly. Over time, people learn not to expect relief, even when it is promised. Hope becomes inefficient. Recreation itself is tightly managed. Outdoor yards are enclosed by fencing and surveillance. Indoor recreation rooms are monitored continuously. Space is limited. Equipment is minimal. Movement within these areas is still regulated. Even during free time, rules dominate. You can walk, but only here. You can sit, but not there. You can talk, but not too loudly. You can stay, but only until the announcement says otherwise. Time limits are strictly enforced. When recreation ends, it ends immediately. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Exercises are cut short. People return to housing units without discussion. This reinforces a core lesson of prison life. Relief is temporary and controlled. From an institutional perspective, this serves a clear purpose. Limited recreation helps prevent unrest by releasing just enough pressure without allowing too much freedom. It balances restriction with minimal relief, keeping the population manageable. But for the individual, this balance is emotionally complex. Recreation is often the only time inmates can experience something close to normal social interaction. It is when they speak freely, laugh quietly, or simply exist outside a cell. By limiting these moments, the system limits emotional expression without eliminating it entirely. This prevents both isolation and unity. Strong social bonds require time, continuity, and trust. Prison schedules limit all three. Recreation windows are too short and too unpredictable for deep connections to form easily. Relationships remain fragmented. Conversations remain unfinished. This fragmentation reduces collective identity while still allowing basic social stability. Waiting plays an even larger role in the afternoon. Between recreation periods, meals, and evening routines, there are often long stretches where nothing happens. People sit on bunks, stare at walls, or pace small spaces. They wait for announcements that may or may not come. Waiting without agency is mentally exhausting. Unlike rest, waiting provides no recovery. The mind remains alert, anticipating instruction. Time slows. Small noises become distractions. Thoughts loop endlessly. This state of constant anticipation creates low-level stress that rarely disappears. In prison, waiting is not accidental. It is built into the schedule. This is one of the reasons afternoons often feel longer than mornings or evenings. Energy is already depleted from work and repetition, but the day is not yet over. There is no meaningful task to complete, only time to endure. Psychologists refer to this as empty time, periods where activity is restricted but consciousness remains active. Extended exposure to empty time has been linked to increased anxiety, irritability, and emotional numbness. Inside prison, empty time is routine. As afternoon turns toward evening, behavior shifts again. Movement slows. Conversations quiet down. People begin preparing mentally for lockdown. Expectations narrow. The focus becomes survival until night. Dinner follows a familiar pattern, scheduled, rushed, and controlled. It mirrors breakfast and structure, reinforcing the sense that days are circular rather than linear. Another count interrupts activity. Another pause resets the environment. By this stage, most incarcerated people are no longer reacting emotionally to the schedule. They have adapted. The mind conserves energy by lowering expectations and minimizing engagement. This is not peace. It is endurance. The illusion of free time has served its purpose. Pressure was released just enough to prevent breaking. Control was never relinquished. As evening approaches, the final phase of the day begins, one that combines silence, confinement, and reflection. This is where the psychological impact of the entire day settles in. Lockdown, silence, and the night that never fully ends. As evening arrives inside an American prison, the pace of the day slows, but control does not. It intensifies. The final phase of the schedule is not built around activity. It is built around confinement. This is the moment when the institution closes in, both physically and psychologically, and the full weight of the day settles onto the individual. Lockdown begins with another count. Just like the counts before it, everyone must be present, visible, and compliant. Movement stops completely. Conversations end. Doors are checked. Once count clears, cell doors close, sometimes with a heavy mechanical sound that echoes through the unit. That sound is not just physical. It is psychological. For many incarcerated people, the closing of the cell door signals the true end of the day. Whatever autonomy existed, even in limited form, is gone. There are no more movement windows. No more scheduled relief. No more opportunities to redirect attention outward. What remains is time alone. In shared cells, space becomes tighter. Personal boundaries shrink. In single cells, isolation becomes complete. In both cases, the environment changes instantly. Noise drops. Motion disappears. The prison grows quiet in a way that feels unnatural. This silence is not peaceful. It is charged. Without distraction, the mind turns inward. Thoughts that were postponed during the day return with intensity. Memories surface. Regrets replay. Worries about the future expand. For many, nighttime is when emotional weight feels heaviest. This is not coincidence. Psychologists have long observed that confinement combined with silence amplifies internal experience. When external stimuli are removed, the brain fills the space with thought. In prison, those thoughts often circle around loss of freedom, time, relationships, identity. Sleep becomes the primary escape. But sleep inside prison is rarely restorative. The environment works against it. Noise travels easily through concrete and steel. Officers conduct overnight checks. Doors open and close. Lights may remain partially on for security reasons. The body is exhausted, but the mind remains alert. This creates a cycle of chronic fatigue. Lack of deep sleep affects emotional regulation, memory, and focus. Over time, people become more irritable, less patient, and more mentally drained. The next day begins before recovery is complete, restarting the cycle. This is how the schedule sustains itself. Daytime control drains energy. Nighttime confinement prevents recovery. Morning arrives before balance is restored. Over weeks, months, and years, this pattern reshapes how people experience time. Nights feel longer than days. Days feel repetitive and compressed. Weeks disappear without distinction. The future becomes abstract. Many incarcerated people describe losing the ability to imagine long-term goals. Planning becomes difficult when every day feels the same. Time stops feeling like a resource and starts feeling like an obstacle, something to survive rather than use. This has profound psychological effects. Researchers studying long-term incarceration have noted that extended exposure to rigid schedules and nightly confinement can reduce motivation, weaken decision-making, and increase dependence on external structure. People adapt by narrowing focus to the immediate present. Get through tonight. Get through tomorrow. Repeat. Even reading, writing, or self-reflection, often encouraged during lockdown, happens within limits. Lights out rules restrict how long a person can remain active. Materials may be limited. Silence is enforced. Self-improvement is allowed, but only within the boundaries of the schedule. What makes lockdown especially powerful is how it completes the day's conditioning. Throughout the day, control is external. At night, its effects become internal. The institution no longer needs to issue commands. The routine echoes in the mind. This is where institutionalization takes root. After enough time, the absence of structure can feel unsettling. Some incarcerated people report anxiety during rare schedule disruptions because unpredictability feels threatening. The system has trained the mind to expect control. This becomes most visible after release. Former inmates often describe struggling with unstructured time. Simple freedoms, choosing when to sleep, when to eat, how to plan a day, can feel overwhelming. The schedule that once felt oppressive becomes something the mind has learned to rely on. The cell door may be open, but the clock remains. Lockdown, then, is not just the end of the day. It is the reinforcement of a system that teaches patience over initiative, compliance over choice, endurance over agency. By controlling how the day ends, prisons ensure the next day begins the same way. The cycle continues, uninterrupted. Understanding this is essential to understanding incarceration itself, not as a series of isolated punishments, but as a continuous process of psychological regulation. From wake-up to lockdown, the system runs quietly, efficiently, and persistently. And long after the lights go out, its effects remain. The system you don't see, but always feel. When people think about prison, they often think about walls, bars, and locked doors. What they rarely think about is the system that operates quietly in the background, hour by hour, day by day, shaping every decision before it can even be made. From wake-up to lockdown, prison life is governed not by chaos, but by structure. A structure so consistent that it becomes invisible. The schedule does not shout. It does not threaten. It simply repeats, teaching the body when to move and the mind when to stop asking questions. This is how control lasts. By organizing time, prisons organize behavior. By limiting choice, they reduce resistance. By repeating the same routines endlessly, they reshape how people think about themselves, their future, and their place in the world. Over time, compliance becomes normal, not because people agree with the system, but because adapting to it requires less energy than resisting it. The most important thing to understand is that this system does not end at the prison gate. For many people, release does not mean freedom in the way outsiders imagine it. After years of living inside a rigid structure, unstructured life can feel confusing and overwhelming. The body may be free, but the mind still listens for announcements, still waits for permission, still measures time and habits learned behind walls. This is not about sympathy or blame. It is about understanding reality. Prisons are designed to maintain order, and the daily system they rely on is effective. But effectiveness comes with consequences, psychological, emotional, and social, that extend far beyond incarceration itself. When we talk about incarceration, we often focus on sentences, statistics, and policies. What we talk about far less is experience. What it feels like to live inside a system where every day follows the same path, where time itself belongs to someone else. Understanding that experience matters, because systems shape people, and time shapes identity. If this documentary helped you see the prison system differently, beyond headlines and assumptions, and you believe more people need to understand how incarceration actually works on a daily level, thanks for watching, like, share, and subscribe. The day may end in lockdown, but the system it creates continues long after.